June 26, 1943. 24,000 feet over occupied France. Lieutenant Robert Johnson saw the flash of metal above him and knew what it meant. 16 Focke-Wulf 190s were diving out of the sun, and his P-47 Thunderbolt was flying tail-end Charlie, the most vulnerable position in the formation. The first burst of cannon fire caught him before he could react. 20mm shells ripped through his fuselage. The cockpit exploded in a shower of glass and metal fragments. Oil sprayed across his goggles, blinding him as his canopy shattered into 1,000 pieces. Where are you watching from today? If you love real W2 stories like the Thunderbolt that refused to die, drop a comment and hit subscribe. Your support keeps history alive. Johnson tried to jettison the canopy to bail out, but the hydraulic system was already destroyed. The manual release wouldn't budge. The frame had warped from the impacts, and he was trapped inside a burning fighter over enemy territory. Then the fire started. Flames erupted from behind the instrument panel, licking at his legs and hands. The smell of burning rubber mixed with aviation fuel as Johnson realized he had perhaps 30 seconds before the aircraft exploded or he burned to death. In that moment, as the German fighters circled for another pass, Robert Johnson made a decision that would prove something the Luftwaffe had refused to believe, that American engineering had fundamentally changed the rules of air combat. Robert Johnson had wanted to fly since he was 11 years old. Growing up in Lawton, Oklahoma during the Depression, he'd scraped together money from odd jobs at a woodworking shop to pay for flying lessons. Starting at age 12, he logged 35 hours over 4 years before earning his private pilot's license at 16. It was an extraordinary achievement for a boy who could barely see over the cockpit rim. When war broke out in 1941, Johnson enlisted immediately. He trained first as a bomber pilot before switching to fighters, a decision that would define his legacy and save his life. By early 1943, he was a lieutenant with the 56th Fighter Group stationed in England, flying escort missions for heavy bombers penetrating deep into Nazi-occupied Europe. His aircraft was a Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, the heaviest single-engine fighter of World War II. At 7 tons fully loaded, the P-47 dwarfed its contemporaries. British pilots called it the Jug because of its massive radial engine cowling, and some American pilots joked it was so big you didn't climb into the cockpit. You put it on like a suit. Critics said it was too heavy, too slow to turn, too much of everything except agility. They wanted sleek fighters like the P-51 Mustang or the British Spitfire. What they didn't understand yet was that Republic Aviation had built something entirely different. A fighter designed not just to kill, but to survive. The Thunderbolt's Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine produced 2,000 horsepower through 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows. The air-cooled radial engine could lose several cylinders and still produce power, unlike the liquid-cooled engines in German fighters, which would seize within minutes if a single coolant line was punctured. Armor plating surrounded the cockpit like a steel cocoon. Self-sealing fuel tanks prevented fires. The entire aircraft was engineered with redundancy built into every system. But on the morning of June 26, 1943, none of that theory had been proven under the worst possible conditions. Johnson had named his P-47 Half Pint, a sardonic joke about the massive fighter's size. He was flying his 16th combat mission, escorting B-17 flying fortresses returning from a raid near Paris. His squadron of 48 Thunderbolts had rendezvoused with the bombers over the French coast and was providing top cover as the formation headed back across the English Channel. Johnson was flying rear guard, weaving back and forth behind the formation to watch for attacking fighters. It was the most dangerous position, exposed and isolated, but someone had to do it. He'd seen the Focke-Wulf 190s climbing from below and assumed they were going after the bombers. Then they kept climbing, right toward his vulnerable position, and he realized with cold certainty that he was their target. The 16 FW-190s hit Johnson's Thunderbolt in coordinated waves. These were experienced pilots from Jagdgeschwader 2, and they knew exactly how to attack the massive American fighter. The first burst shattered Johnson's canopy and destroyed his hydraulic system. The second wave raked the fuselage from tail to nose, severing control cables and puncturing fuel lines. Oil from the engine sprayed back across what remained of the windscreen, coating Johnson's goggles and face. 20mm cannon shells and 7.92mm machine gun bullets tore through half-pint's aluminum skin. The sound was deafening, a continuous hammering punctuated by the deeper boom of cannon impacts. Each hit sent shrapnel flying through the cockpit. Johnson felt sharp pains in his hands and legs as metal fragments tore into his flesh. The instrument panel disintegrated. Glass from shattered gauges mixed with the oil covering his face. The throttle quadrant took multiple hits, jamming the throttle at full power. Johnson's radio went dead. His compass spun uselessly. Then came the fire. Flames erupted from behind the instrument panel where hydraulic fluid and fuel lines had been severed. The fire spread quickly in the 100-mile-per-hour wind stream blasting through the shattered canopy. Johnson could feel his gloves beginning to smolder. The skin on his face felt like it was cooking. He grabbed the manual canopy release and pulled with all his strength. Nothing. The canopy frame had warped from the impacts and wouldn't budge. He tried again, panic rising, still nothing. The escape hatch was jammed shut by damaged structure. Johnson had seconds to make a decision. He could stay in the cockpit and burn to death, or he could try something desperate. He pushed the stick forward into a steep dive, using the increased airspeed to blast out the flames with raw airflow. The Thunderbolt plunged toward the French countryside, accelerating past 400 miles per hour. The maneuver worked. The fire went out. But now Johnson was diving vertically at full throttle with a jammed throttle, no hydraulics, limited control authority, and German fighters still shooting at him. He pulled out of the dive at 8,000 feet, the G-forces pinning him to his seat. Half-Pint shuddered violently as he leveled off, pieces of the aircraft tearing away in the slipstream. He could see daylight through holes in both wings. The right aileron was mostly gone. Control surfaces were shredded. Somehow, impossibly, the engine was still running. The big Pratt & Whitney radial had taken multiple hits, but enough cylinders remained functional to produce power. Black smoke poured from the cowling and oil continued to coat everything, but the propeller was still turning. Johnson wiped oil from his goggles and tried to assess his situation. He was over enemy territory with a crippled fighter that by all rights should already be in pieces on the ground. His squadron was gone, disappeared during his dive. He was alone, wounded, and being hunted by the most lethal fighter pilots in the Luftwaffe. He turned west toward the English Channel, toward home. Every control input produced unexpected results. The stick felt loose, disconnected. Several control cables had been severed, and Johnson was flying the Thunderbolt using trim tabs and sheer willpower. The aircraft wanted to roll left constantly. He had to hold full right stick just to maintain level flight. Then he saw it. One Focke-Wulf 190 had followed him down and was now positioned on his tail, just beyond effective firing range. The German pilot was stalking him, waiting for the crippled Thunderbolt to slow down or lose control. Johnson pushed the throttle forward, forgetting it was already jammed at full power. There was nothing he could do to go faster. The FW-190 closed the distance. Johnson saw the muzzle flashes as the German opened fire again. More impacts, more holes appearing in the wings. A chunk of his right elevator tore away. The Thunderbolt bucked and shook but kept flying. Johnson tried evasive maneuvers, but with damaged controls his options were limited. Every turn bled energy he couldn't afford to lose. The German stayed on him, firing burst after burst. Johnson started counting impacts out loud, partially from shock, partially to stay conscious. 50 hits, 75, 100. The French coast was still minutes away. Johnson didn't know if Half-Pint could make it another mile, let alone all the way across the English Channel. His hands were burned. Blood ran down his legs from shrapnel wounds. Oil and hydraulic fluid covered every surface, and the German was still shooting. The German pilot was methodical, professional. He would close to within 200 yards, fire a burst, then pull up slightly to observe the results before attacking again. Johnson could see him clearly through the oil-smeared remnants of his canopy. The FW-190 was pristine, undamaged, its mottled gray and green camouflage sharp against the blue sky. 120 hits. 150. Johnson kept counting, his voice hoarse. Each burst sent more metal fragments flying through the cockpit. His left hand was bleeding freely now. A cannon shell had punched through the cockpit floor near his feet, and he could see the ground below through the hole. The engine coughed, missed a beat, then caught again. Johnson's heart stopped. If the engine quit now, he was done. But the Pratt & Whitney kept running. That massive radial engine was absorbing punishment that would have destroyed any inline engine. Johnson crossed the French coast at 2,000 feet, the English Channel stretching ahead. 18 miles of open water between him and England. The German followed him out over the water, still firing. 175 hits, 180. The FW-190 moved closer. The German pilot's frustration was evident in his increasingly aggressive attacks. He was expending all his ammunition on this lone American fighter, and it refused to go down. Johnson saw the white cliffs of Dover ahead. England. Safety. Maybe. 200 hits. Then something changed. The Germans stopped firing. The FW-190 slid forward, pulling alongside Johnson's crippled Thunderbolt. For a moment, the two fighters flew in formation, separated by perhaps 30 feet of air. Johnson could see the German pilot clearly through the Focke-Wulfs canopy. The German was staring at Half-Pint, his head moving as he assessed the damage. Both wings were shredded, with fabric and metal hanging in strips. The fuselage was riddled with holes. The tail looked like it had been attacked with a chainsaw. Hydraulic fluid and oil streamed from multiple punctures. It was impossible that this aircraft was still flying. The German pilot looked across at Johnson. Their eyes met for a brief moment across the 30 feet of sky separating them. Then the German did something that Johnson would remember for the rest of his life. He raised his gloved hand to his forehead in a precise military salute. He held it for a long second, then banked away, heading back toward France, his ammunition exhausted and his fuel running low. Johnson was alone over the English Channel, flying a wreck that had survived over 200 hits and 21 cannon shells, saved by an enemy who had finally run out of ways to kill him. And in that moment, as the English coast grew larger ahead, Johnson understood something profound. This wasn't just about one pilot's survival. It was about what American industry had built, a fighter so over-engineered, so redundant in every system, that it had redefined what was possible in air combat. The German pilot's identity remains debated by historians. Many believe it was Egon Meyer, the Luftwaffe ace who had developed the head-on attack technique devastating American bomber formations. Meyer was known for his tactical brilliance and his professional respect for worthy opponents. He was flying in that sector that day, and the methodical, precise attacks matched his known style. Whoever he was, what he witnessed that day, changed how German fighter pilots viewed American aircraft. For the Luftwaffe, the incident became a nightmare scenario. If an American fighter could absorb 200 machine gun rounds and 21 cannon shells and still make it home, what did that say about German armament? The standard 20mm MG-151 cannon was supposed to be decisive. A few hits should destroy any fighter. Yet this Thunderbolt had taken dozens of cannon impacts and kept flying. Johnson crossed the English coast at the 500 feet, barely maintaining altitude. Half-Pint was dying slowly. The engine was running rough, multiple cylinders damaged or destroyed. Oil pressure was dropping. The airframe shook continuously, structural integrity compromised by hundreds of holes and severed components. He'd been flying for 17 minutes since the initial attack. Every second, he expected catastrophic failure. A wing could fold. The engine could seize. A control cable could snap. His group was operating from RAF Manston that day, a forward base on the Kent coast. He headed there on a direct line, unable to maneuver if he encountered any problems. His landing gear was hydraulically operated, and the hydraulic system was destroyed. He'd have to do a belly landing, sliding the 7-ton fighter onto the grass on its belly. Other pilots from his squadron had made it back and were circling the field, low on fuel but waiting to see if Johnson would appear. They'd seen him go down under the initial attack and assumed he was dead or captured. When they spotted Half-Pint approaching the field, trailing smoke and oil, barely maintaining altitude, the radio chatter was incredulous. Johnson set up for his approach. With no hydraulics, He couldn't lower his flaps, which meant he'd be coming in fast. The damaged control surfaces made precise flying impossible. He'd get one chance at this landing. He lined up with the grass runway, the Thunderbolt wallowing through the air like a wounded whale. The engine coughed again, and Johnson's grip tightened on the stick. Not yet. Just a few more seconds. Give me a few more seconds. Half Pint crossed the runway threshold at 140 miles per hour. Too fast. But Johnson had no choice. He cut the mixture, shutting down the engine, and the big fighter settled toward the grass. The impact when it hit was brutal. The Thunderbolt slid across the field on its belly, metal shrieking, dirt and grass flying. It slewed slightly left, then right, before finally grinding to a stop in a cloud of dust. Johnson sat in the cockpit for a long moment, unable to move. He was alive. Against every law of probability and physics, he was alive. Emergency crews were already running toward the aircraft. Fire extinguishers ready, medics preparing for the worst. When they finally got the jammed canopy open and pulled Johnson out, they were stunned he was conscious, let alone able to walk. His hands and face were burned, blood soaked through his flight suit from multiple shrapnel wounds. Oil and hydraulic fluid covered every inch of him. But he was alive. Then the ground crew began examining Half Pint, and the true scope of what had happened became clear. The maintenance crews and engineering officers who examined Half Pint that afternoon at RAF Manston couldn't believe what they were seeing. The damage was beyond anything they'd witnessed on an aircraft that had made it home. They started counting holes. After 2 hours of careful documentation, they stopped at 200 bullet holes and 21 cannon shell impacts. The actual number was likely higher, but some damage overlapped where multiple hits had struck the same area. Both wings looked like Swiss cheese. Fabric covering on the control surfaces hung in tatters. Several ribs were completely severed. Hydraulic lines, electrical wiring, and fuel lines had been cut in multiple locations. That the wings hadn't folded under flight loads was itself miraculous. The fuselage damage was even more extensive. Cannon shells had punched completely through the aircraft from side to side. The radio compartment was destroyed. The armor plate behind Johnson's seat had stopped at least 3 rounds that would have killed him. The tail section had absorbed dozens of hits, with the rudder barely attached. The engine told its own story. 7 of the 18 cylinders were damaged, 2 completely destroyed. Oil lines were severed in multiple places. The accessory section had taken direct hits. Cooling baffles were shredded. Yet the Pratt & Whitney R2800 had continued producing enough power to keep the aircraft flying for 17 minutes and nearly 60 miles. Republic Aviation had designed the P-47 with redundancy and survivability as core principles. But even the engineers who built it were amazed. Half Pint had absorbed punishment that exceeded every design parameter and kept flying. The aircraft was officially declared beyond economical repair, but those photographs would travel across every American airbase in Europe. Pilots studied them and realized with absolute certainty that the P-47 Thunderbolt could take them home when nothing else would. Over the following 11 months, Johnson systematically validated everything the Thunderbolt represented. By May 1944, he had 27 confirmed aerial victories, surpassing Eddie Rickenbacker's World War I record of 26 kills. His tactical approach evolved from his June 26th experience. He understood intimately what the P-47 could survive, and he used that knowledge to press attacks other pilots might have broken off. Johnson specialized in head-on attacks, a tactic that required nerves of steel. His June 26th experience had burned away any fear of taking damage. The 56th Fighter Group became the highest-scoring P-47 group in the European theater, with 674 confirmed kills by war's end. Johnson's example spread throughout the group. That confidence translated into tactical aggression that German pilots couldn't match.